probably heard myself say and other podcasters say, do your work. What does that really mean? Do your work. When we get down to it, what are these, motivational speakers, coaches, therapists talking about when they say that they want you to do your own work? That is really what's impeding you from getting where you want to be in life. So if you're feeling stuck right now, if you're self-doubting yourself, if that inner, mean girl, as I call her, or that inner self-critic is really loud in your life and keeping you back from a centered life thriving, then, usually our answer in general is do your own work. But what does that mean? If you want to hear a little bit more about that, then you want to hear my guest today, Rachel Astarte, talk about her self-development work as a coach and as a licensed marriage and family therapist. So keep listening.
I know your deep, dark secret. You don't like your life. You're a woman in midlife, and for the past 2 decades or more, you've poured yourself in to other people. You've poured yourself into your career, your family, and yet on the inside, you feel broken. And that's no way to be. I'm Dr. Natalie Marr. I'm a clinical psychologist and a life transition expert. It wasn't too long ago that I was in your shoes, waking up in my early 40s, thinking I've got 2 failed marriages, and I'm a single mom for the second time in my life. And I just knew that I could do better, that I could feel better. Fortunately for you, I have about 20 years experience clinically. And so I've created a method that will help you learn to love your story. I know that the story that you're telling yourself about your life feels awful. And I know that you think that you can't change that. I assure you, you can. And when we work together, I'm going to help you to craft a different story, a story that you love, a story that makes you want to get up every single day. Let's work together to help you love your story.
Are you on my mailing list yet? Because if you're not, you really should be. You want to join at learntoloveyourstory.com. If you scroll down, I'm giving away a freebie for you. Honestly, you know what it is? A free course. I sell online courses, but this is a course just for you. And it's about freeing yourself, letting go of what others' expectations and ideas are for you. That nagging self-doubt in your head, it's usually fueled by your consideration of what others think of you over your consideration of what you think of you. And so I teach you in my video all about what is underlying that kind of self-doubt and how to get out of that conundrum. And I give you a workbook that goes with it that helps you to build the skill sets that you're going to need for that. So please make sure you're on my mailing list, because at the least, you're going to get a free gift. And at the most, you're going to hear about all the things that we're doing on Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving and learntoloveyourstory.com. And you don't want to be missing out on any of the new things that'll be coming your way. Welcome back, everybody. We have a great guest with us today. Rachel Astarte is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she defines herself as a holistic psychotherapist, transformational coach, author, and educator, specializing in self, solitude, and service. She offers down-to-earth guidance for socially conscious seekers craving balance in turbulent times. Rachel is the author of Celebrating Solitude, How to Discover and Honor Your Highest Self, as well as novels, screenplays, and articles. I'm really excited to hear more about that, all of which focus on self-development and connection with our human and our non-human family. Rachel's podcast, Self-Talk with Rachel Astarte, helps listeners negotiate a healthy relationship with themselves and others. Welcome, Rachel, to the Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving podcast. We are so excited to have you here.
Dr. Natalie, it is an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So my first question for all of my guests is, tell us your story. What brought Rachel to this moment in time?
Yeah, it's a great question to start with, right? Where did it all start?
Right.
Well, it started when I was very little. I was always drawn to the self and why do people do what they do. But I was also really drawn to nature.
Mm,
And so I began to sort of combine the two, even as a small child, um, trying to understand our relationship with nature and trying to understand our relationship with other human beings. I was a very solitary child. And so that's another focus of my work. I
yeah,
mean, talk about like taking your childhood dream and making it a
exactly.
reality, right?
Exactly. Using
So,
your gifts, for sure. You're
yeah.
using your gifts. Yes.
100%. And so for me, it was just about finding this beautiful balance between being your authentic self and taking that out into the world.
Mm,
And so I started very young as a writer and as an actor. What I loved about writing, of course, I started with poetry. My father was a poet. And I started to write poems about things like nature and things like the self. Excuse me. And then I was an actor as well. And what I loved about being an actor, and I did that for many, many years, I loved that I could take somebody else's character and breathe life into it and make that a real being. So
yeah.
that was super exciting for me. And so as I got older, as it is with writers and actors, it's hard to make a living. And so
Mm-hmm.
I went back to school to become a transformational life coach shortly after my son was born. And I loved doing that. I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist, so I love to do guided meditations and all of that. But I began to realize that even that was not fulfilling. I was starting to get more interested in my clients' backgrounds. I was
Mm-hmm.
getting dangerously close to doing talk therapy with them, which is not legal. So, because coaches are coaches and therapists are
And
therapists,
therapists are
right?
therapists. Yep. Hmm.
So I
Oh, believe
decided,
me, I know when I have my
no,
legs in both worlds, this is a big deal. Yeah.
yeah. And I think this will speak to your listeners. I had a midlife career change.
Hmm.
And so I was, let's see, I guess I was 46 when I went back to school to become a marriage and family counselor. And,
Wow.
so I didn't get licensed until I was 50.
Well,
So
how
just
about
to let
that?
the ladies
And
out
good
there
for you.
know. Yeah. So,
Exactly.
and so
Yes,
I've
exactly. I
started.
mean, really, let's just pause. Like, you're right. Let the listeners know you can start a new career at 50. It's okay. In your 40s, you can go back to school and start a new career at 50. That's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm seeing more and more with women, my clients, and even like my older sister, went back to school to become a Spanish teacher in her 40s. It's such a common thing, and so don't let time hold you back. So
Never.
that's a
Yes.
big message. Yeah, so once I became a therapist, I began to realize now I can begin to pull together all the things that I love. That's why the holistic psychotherapy came into play because I've always been drawn to mind, body, and spirit and how they
Hmm.
work together for our healing because we can't do
Yeah.
just one of those three. They have to work in
No.
conjunction.
No,
Hmm.
they have to. They have to. So, like, what is it do you think that you bring to your holistic approach in therapy and coaching?
Yeah, it's a great question. So everything comes from the self.
Hmm.
Everything we do comes from our core being. So when we get all of the chatter out of the way and all of the stuff that we've been taught or society has told us about ourselves, and we get very quiet and we learn what is it that motivates me, right? Then we can start to piece apart any childhood trauma, right? So that might be part of the
Hmm.
mind. But we can also work with how is my body reacting when I get activated or triggered? How can I work to regulate my emotions using my mind, body? And of course, the spirit infuses all of that. So,
Yeah.
no matter what your spiritual practice is, now I've worked with Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, Wiccan practitioners, shamanic practitioners, types of spirituality. It's irrelevant what you believe. What
Right.
matters is that you have something that
Hmm.
guides you. So that's how the holistic aspect comes into my practice, because once we have what I call a strong foundation of self, that's how we can manage life's challenges with grace. It
Right.
also helps us to live an enriched life, a fully human life. But most importantly, and this is the big part, I do what's called socially conscious self-development, which means we don't stop with us. Living your best life is fantastic, but really, and this again, this speaks especially to people in midlife, we are being called to give back to the world, give our wisdom back. So a lot of my clients who come to me who are women in midlife who say, I've done all the things. I have a family, I have a career, I have animals that I love, I have
Yeah.
friends. Why do I feel unfulfilled? And that's one of the reasons, is because we are not
Totally.
living up to our full potential, which is we're meant to share our wisdom.
Well, and something else occurs to me as you've laid it out like that. You're talking in your holistic way of anchoring back to the self as the core. That's the anchor. And
Yeah.
then once you've built that up over time, then the whole idea is you go out into the world and spread that wealth, essentially, your internalized wisdom, your gifting to the world. And that is kind of how this all works. But I think that the programming and social conditioning that we've had would tell us the reverse, as women, especially, that are caretaking and are having the families and having the pets and being in careers that are serving others, that's our hustle for worthiness. But then, of course, we have no anchor. We have 5 bazillion anchors. Like we have our hands in way too many things, and we feel scattered and lost and aimless and without purpose, because that isn't the direction it's supposed to be going. It's supposed to start from the self and go out. I really love how you beautifully laid that out. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with you. There is all this pressure. And the reason we feel unanchored is because we haven't, I mean, where does all of this service to others come from? It comes from us.
Right.
Right. So if we're not clean and clear, if we're not on the path of our own development, and by the way, it's going to be different for everyone. There is no cut and dry, cookie cutter way that we need to live. When I work with clients one-on-one, when I teach my classes, I'm encouraging for you all to bring out your uniqueness, because that means when you give back to your family, to your friends, to your colleagues, to the clerk at the grocery store,
Yeah.
you're giving authentically from yourself, and you're not
Yes.
giving more than you have. That's
Right.
important. Yeah.
Yes. But that authenticity is so, it feels elusive, I think, for my listenership. As I'm talking to you listeners, I know that up until midlife, there are a lot of us that put on a ton of masks, work in a lot of roles, do a lot of things, and never really come into touch with who we are and what we want as a person, because it's been kind of beat out of us that that's a selfish way of living. And so we really have to let go of that particular piece of social conditioning, lie is what I would call it, in order to do what Rachel's talking about here, which is to anchor back to the self, which then in turn is kind of a garden that you're, creating fertile ground to do lots of service in your life. So it doesn't even take away that you'll eventually kind of do the service that you're seeking. You can't start there. You have to, that's the end game. That's not, that's the product of having really good being in touch with yourself, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think your analogy of a fertile garden is a beautiful one, because we need to tend that garden.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
that's a lifelong process.
Right.
And
Yes.
we love our garden. We love ourselves. And a lot of people, I can hear people saying, I don't really love myself. Well, that's part of the work. That's
Yeah.
part of the work, is undoing that conditioning you were talking about. Because
Yeah.
when you're born, you're perfect. Somebody had to tell you you weren't perfect. I think that bears repeating.
Yeah.
Someone had to tell you that you
Teach
weren't
you
perfect.
that you
Yes,
weren't perfect. Yes.
right. And it could have been your caregivers, your parents, your teachers. It could have been religious leaders. It could just be society. It could be advertising. It could be whatever. And it's coming at us from all sides.
Oh,
So
definitely.
we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. We're keeping up with the Joneses or whatever it is. And we're not really taking the time often, as women in particular, to say, what do I want?
Hmm.
What do I need? And let that be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And even if we get to the point where we ask ourselves, what do I want? What do I need? If you haven't been tending to that garden, you may not know. You may not know. And so that's, as you said, so apropos, like that's the work right there is the work. And we'll start wherever you're at,
Yeah.
it really, some of us, it's that we just we can't even answer those integral questions, those starter questions that are going to help open up where next steps are. And that's okay. Wherever you are, listener, that's where you get to be. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to just go back to something else you said about, getting yourself in order so that you can give back to the world. It is
Mm-hmm.
a process. So I don't want people to hear this and think, I have to hit a certain level before I can give back. No, no, no.
No.
You are already perfect as you are. There may
Yes.
be things you want to change about yourself. That's beautiful. I teach
Mm-hmm.
all of my clients and all of my students, the number one rule is non-judgment. Non-judgment of yourself, non-judgment of others. We're
Yeah.
all spirits having a human experience, right? We're all here to
Yep.
learn what we need to learn. So as long as you're on the path and doing the work, you have plenty to share just by being your wonderful self.
Yes, absolutely. I hear. I echo that for sure. What would you say your line of work is like the biggest challenge that, people in midlife, women in midlife is my listenership, but just, people in general, as they're hitting kind of this major life transition, what do you think the biggest or most common challenge is for that group?
Yeah, I think for this group, and I'm one of them. So it's
Me too.
yeah. Woohoo!
I know. I'm happy about it. It smells like joy and freedom to me to be in this part of my life. But I
Exactly.
realize that I'm in a centered life thriving because I've done some work and some of us have not.
Right.
So yeah.
That's
Mhm.
right. And that's why you have this podcast, which is
That's right.
such a necessary and beautiful thing.
Oh, thank you.
Um, so so the biggest conflict that I see with women that I work with in midlife is the comparison trap. But it's not just necessarily comparing people their own
Mm.
age. They're comparing themselves now to who they were 20 years ago.
Interesting. You're right. Yes.
So why
Yes.
am I not like I had so much drive when I was 30. I had so much drive when I was 25. What's happening? We don't realize that we are in transformation and midlife is just like I was going to say cocooning, but we're not really closing off, but we do
Yeah.
have to go inside and we
Mm-hmm.
do have to take stock of our life experiences and transform them into wisdom. Life experience alone is not wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Taking the time to process the lessons from what we've learned in our life transforms that into wisdom. And that is what we share as wisdom sharers, or as
Yes.
mentors with the world. So that's a big one. And I've
Yeah.
experienced it for sure. You look in the mirror and you're going, I don't recognize that lady at all. You know what I mean?
Who is
Right.
she?
And
Yes.
we have to create a new relationship with ourselves and see ourselves as emerging, not
Oh, I
dying.
like it. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, wait. We gotta like put a pin in, have a relationship with yourself because we definitely need to circle back to that. I love me a good metaphor, and so I actually liked it when you were like the cocoon. I'm thinking to myself, you're right, because what it really is a metamorphosis.
Yeah.
It's not a death or a like something is going away necessarily. It's just that at this stage there is kind of this whole body, mind, spirit change.
Yes.
And if you're willing and open to it, that transition goes easily. If you're pushing against it with lots of times with that conditioning, with what you've been taught to
Yeah.
believe about yourself and your world,
Yeah.
it's a lot harder. It's a ton harder when you're
Yeah.
clinging to these old ideals of what it should look like and what in my, in my 20s, I could do this. In my 30s, I could do this. Why in my 40s and 50s am I not being able to have that kind of drive? Well, your body, mind, and spirit is metamorphosizing into something completely brand new. And if you're along for the openness of that journey, no, it won't look like it did in 20 and 30, but it could look amazing. And then you had, both sides of that, right? You're amazing then, you're amazing now, just very different than where you started from, for sure.
Absolutely. And we don't even realize, because this is such a radical shift. 20 to 30 isn't that big of a radical shift. Even 30 to 40 isn't that big of a radical shift.
Right.
40 to 50 is like, holy crap.
Holy crap. Uh-huh.
I mean,
Yep.
and like, oh boy, okay. And then the
Uh-huh.
clock is ticking and your mortality starts going, hello, I'm right over here.
Yeah.
And you've got, 30 to 50 years left on this planet. What are you going to do with them? And there's all this pressure, right?
Yes.
We have to
Yes.
understand that midlife, right, is not even the end. We are preparing ourselves for yet another phase, which is elderhood.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. After 65, we step into our true shining moment.
Yeah.
So there is a metamorphosis that's happening. It's like, okay, ladies, it's time to gather your life experience, learn from it, know what's what. And by the way, this is a blessing.
Yes.
People are going to be surprised. This is a blessing of perimenopause.
Yeah.
What? A blessing of
I
perimenopause?
know.
Yeah, there's a blessing.
Okay, everybody listen quick.
Yeah.
You know?
The blessing of perimenopause and moving into menopause is that we learn to discern. We
Mm-hmm.
just don't have the bandwidth, the energy to deal with the crap we did at 20 and 30 and even
Nope.
40.
Nope.
We're done,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so that already, that's a good sign of I'm stepping into my power. I'm
Yep.
stepping into my voice, right? So instead of letting it deflate you, let it inflate you. Another
Absolutely.
thing about perimenopause and menopause. So I'm postmenopausal for a few years now, and I can say from the other side, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Good. Because I'm banking on that.
Just get through. I was psychotic during my perimenopause, but
Man.
from the other side, it's beautiful, and I'll tell you what it is. And this was told to me by my acupuncturist, who was a man, by the way, and gave me such beautiful advice. And I've read about it since then. When we're no longer bleeding out, but we're retaining our energy. And
Ooh,
that
interesting.
is
Yes.
moving us forward. The Native American traditions call it our wise blood, that we are, instead of bleeding out, we're retaining. And so that's filling us up with energy and filling us up with power so that we can go out. So we can go out and be the wisdom sharers, the wisdom keepers, and eventual elders.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. When you think about that, what a poetic way. And I would say there is a gift. You're right. I mean, it's one of those gifts that you were given through the sandpaper kind of smoothing us down over time. So perimenopause feeling like that sandpaper, but you're absolutely right. We have no margins at this point. Like physically don't have margins because there are all of those changes happening, which then translates or transmutates into spiritual and mind, based limitations and just no margins. And so we're going to be much more discerning. If we are open to it, we can learn that discernment about where our energy goes, because we don't want to be just handing it out to any old person on the corner. The first person who asks for something, which might be part of our old programming, like, yes, 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 I'll say yes to all the things and just hopefully I'll have endless energy. Not going to happen. So now you have to be really discerning about where you place that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes it happens for you because you find yourself getting angry or deflated or short-tempered or passive aggressive. All of those are indicators that you're leaking your energy.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
So that's the work that I do with people to help. Let's bring that back in. Let's bring that back. Find out what's okay for you, and learning how to say no, and learning how to ask for help.
Yes.
Is something that is just not taught to women.
It's not an option.
Right.
We're just, like, it wasn't on the menu. We were never taught that part.
Right.
Like, we were taught about how to say yes in several different ways. No was not on the menu, I don't think. I don't remember that being taught to me. Just
Mhm.
saying. I'm going to circle back to having a relationship with yourself. Talk a little bit more about that. I am big. I mean, my website is learntoloveyourstory.com. And my original message really was that self-love kind of can heal all things. It really is. It's the secret sauce that will help you expand and expound in your life. It's tricky to do. And so I created, my 5 courses, and I have my group coaching package kind of based on teaching you the skills of getting to the place of self-love. But I want you to talk to us a little bit more from your perspective. Why is it so important to have a relationship with ourselves, especially at this age?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's everything we do comes from us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the source of the energy that is generated outward into collective consciousness, into the quantum field. We, as insignificant as we might feel on the planet or in the universe or in the cosmos, we are so important because we are feeding the energy all around us. Everything is energy. There are no physical building blocks of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's all vibrating energy. You know, when you walk into a room, if the person in the room is in a good mood or a bad mood, if they don't even say a word, you
That's
can
right.
feel their energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can feel yours. So it's so important to do this inner work. I don't even like to call it work. I call it a self-adventure. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes adventures can be scary. And,
Mm-hmm.
like the hero's journey, right? And we usually have the first refusal of the call. I can't do that. I don't love myself at all. I'm not worthy. All the
Mm-hmm.
negative self-talk, small s talk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, but what we begin to realize when we do this work is that it's very important for us to contribute to the collective. Now,
Yeah.
now you talked about women in midlife, and that's also really important to bring up too. People don't like to hear this, but I'm pretty blunt. We
Yeah.
are all going to die. We're all
Yeah.
going to die. So at around the age of 50-ish, we have, depending, I like to say I've got another 50 or so years left.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Who
We'll
knows?
see.
But mortality is a thing. And so instead of denying that, if we take it as this blessing, like now is the time to gather, now is the time to bring closer to us, as I said, those life experiences, transform them into wisdom and share that, change the collective consciousness by our very presence.
Right.
This is the time to do it. You can't do it when you're 20 because you don't know enough. You don't know
No.
yourself. In your 30s, you're still trying to sort of put into play what you've learned about yourself in your 20s. In your
Yes.
40s, things are starting to settle, but you have an eye toward the 50s, and so there's a little anxiety often right there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so by the time we hit around 50, is that pause moment where we
Yes.
can say it's time for us to do this work so that we can go out back into the world and share who we are. For some of us, like you, like me, like maybe some of your listeners, you've made a career out of it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Others can simply be,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Who you are when you show up to work, when you show up with your kids or your spouse or your partner, or at the family reunion, or like I said, in line at the grocery store. Everything that you transmit matters. That's not
Yes.
pressure. I mean that as a celebration. And
Yeah.
no one is going to be the way you are, right?
Right.
There's only one you, at least in this realm. I mean, maybe
Right.
in the multiverse there might be more yous, but we're not going to go to the multiverse.
We
We're
don't.
going to
Yeah.
stay here.
We'll stay here. This is
Right
the only.
now.
This is the only one we got right now.
Right.
Okay.
So you are the ambassador of your own uniqueness. What a beautiful thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why the self-work is so important. That's why getting your inner
It
house
is.
clean is so important.
It is. And I'm also struck by that only you then can intimately know you,
Yeah.
And so love it really takes that level of intimacy, right?
Yeah.
And if you're going to start and do this introspective work, if you're ready for that and you're looking for more ease at this stage and you want that centered life thriving, you're going to have to get to know this person that you're going to be doing this work with. And
Yeah.
I know that it seems like, I mean, you're talking to two therapists. We know we sound a little therapist-y as we say these things. And yet, like, we think relationally. We always do. We anthropomorphize, animals. We anthropomorphize, which means we humanize all of these things. Our car, we give them names. Seriously, we know your favorite bag. You probably, have anthropomorphized your favorite bag. So that's all to say, that's how humans operate. We operate via the connections that we have with others and with our things. So why wouldn't we have a connection to ourselves? Now, we haven't been taught that. Traditionally, the social, conditioning that we've gotten doesn't necessarily do that. Some of us came from some family systems and maybe some spiritual or wisdom traditions that did. Not many of us did not in Western culture. And so this is the time. I mean, part of the not having the margins is this is the time to reckon with that, because you only get one you. And you are the only you that is ever going to be for billions of years. Never, ever before has in the 8 billion of people on earth been a you, and for the billions of years after. And so why not get to know this woman? She's amazing. She's the only version of her. And I love how you said, and it, some of us kind of create a career around our own self-work because that's part of our service to the world. Yet, even if it's just so that you can show up differently in your relationships as they stay, in the careers you're in the community work you're in the friends and family relationships you're in, all still very important that energy is getting spread throughout the world. But mostly, from my standpoint, I just want people to love themselves, because if you at least have that one relationship anchored, everything else in life gets, as I said, tastes a little more joyful and free. It just does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And love is at the root of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning, when you did the intro, when I talk about having a relationship with our human and non-human family, I'm not even just talking about plants. I'm talking, because everything is vibrating energy. My favorite pen, I don't anthropomorphize it. I see it as a being with its own spirit, and it has its own mind, and it's its own kind of energy that I work with.
Yeah.
So that's love. That's love and connection. And that's what's so important.
That's a great reminder. I mean, you've said that several times that everything is energy, right? Like they're just it's just vibrating at different frequencies. And so some feels solid and looks solid, and some is ethereal, and it's just the space between us. And yet all of it has energy. So yeah, I mean, we relate to things. That's just what we do at a basic level, energy relating to other energy. And that's why if you've been self-neglecting, taking, that, having that kind of a relationship with yourself, I think it really is one of the biggest challenges, for sure, for this group of people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with you. And it's so funny how, and you mentioned this earlier, we're so quick to help others and be there for others and not show ourselves the same respect and love. And I jokingly say with my clients and my students, what makes you so special that you are the only one on the planet who does not deserve love?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why are you the only one? I mean, I need to know this. I need to figure out why are you the only one that doesn't deserve to be loved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially by yourself. And so one of the pieces of work that I do, like when I work with self-talk, will actually, again, bringing non-judgment to it. The way that we talk to ourselves, one of the exercises that I do is, reframing how we talk to ourselves in a way that, and sometimes this helps people make the leap, is imagine you're talking to a friend.
Yeah.
right? So I really,
No, I completely agree with that methodology. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, well, you're not good at this. What would you say to a friend who said that? Well,
Hmm.
you would probably say, well, you can get better at it. You know, everybody can learn. You have the capacity to learn. So if there's something you want to learn, go ahead and do it, mama, do it, you
Hmm.
know, and that changes. And now imagine you're saying that to yourself, right?
Hmm.
Huge shift, huge shift. And
Totally.
that's your highest self, your capital S self talking to you.
Hmm.
And that's the relationship we want to get into a dialogue with, is with our highest self. I am a huge proponent of talking to yourself out loud. I
Yeah.
know people don't really think that that is sane, but I think it really is. I think it's
Well,
very, very helpful.
I think it is too. I mean, from a neurological basis,
Mm-hmm.
as a clinical psychologist, I am an advocate of communicating with yourself in different formats because it uses different parts of your brain, and the
Oh,
more
yeah.
parts of our brain we're using, the more strong and quickly we're creating neural pathways. I mean, I think it takes, I don't know, like 250 times ish for you to learn a new thing, for it to fire 250 times in a neural pathway, for it to become an actual pathway in your brain.
Mm.
The exception to that is if you're doing stuff in play, then it only takes about 40 or 50 passes in your brain to have that solidly go in, which is, one of the little sneaky truths of why kids are such great learners, right? They're playing all the time and everything is being learned in play. But we can tap into that too. We can biohack that too if we want to. But yeah, I think that's it's important to put that in perspective. Like we do have this capacity to learn but the more we talk to ourselves, the more we write it down in a journal, the more we talk to somebody else about it, the more any way of creating self-reflection, as many times as we can do that, the quicker this stuff will come to us and start to click and start to be kind of second nature instead of the effortful process that it is during the learning part of the
Yeah.
phase. Mm-hmm.
So all of that is so important. And yeah, journaling, as a writer, I'm a huge proponent of
Right.
keeping a journal. And sometimes my clients and students will, bring notebooks to their sessions, and they read, and they read their dreams, they read something they were working on. So that's also extremely vital
Mm-hmm.
to lock that information in.
Yeah.
And also the other part of it is community. So
Mm.
when I teach my classes, they're usually a smaller group, and that gives us a chance to really speak to each other and listen to each other. And if someone's coming, so my classes end up to some extent being a little bit like a group therapy session, but also a little bit of a class.
Yeah.
And hey, I've been working on this week, and we will share uh, our thoughts and supports for one another, and that's really helpful too, because then it's not just you're the one with all the problems and you're showing up to class or whatever, but you're actually able to say, here's some wisdom that I've picked up along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it will help you. And that's the community. So this is what we were talking about
Yes.
earlier, sharing your wisdom with the world, or sharing your true self with the world. And you don't have to be a scholar or fully self-actualized.
Mm-mm.
Just having gone through something, you can help someone else. And so
Yes.
that's why the other aspect of my work is about self and community. In
Right.
fact, my slogan for my practice is unity through individuality,
Oh,
because a community is only as strong as the individuals that comprise it.
sure.
That's another reason why we do this self work, not just to
Mm-hmm.
share our gifts, but to be able to be compassionate about others and learn
Right.
from others. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm big on community too. I think, collectively, we're wired to be in community and we want to belong, right? And so anytime we're doing this kind of work, it becomes more valuable when it's being shared, and it becomes more valuable when we can hear our own stories in other people's stories. And that is always a phenomenon that comes about in that kind of a community. I like that though, that say that again. It's the individual. Say that
Unity,
again.
unity through individuality.
Unity through individuality. I love that. That's a really great way to frame it. So tell us a little bit about your book and your writing. I am big on writing. I'm trying to do more writing in between all the other things that I'm doing, but I would love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to write your book and I mean, plays and everything else. Just go for it. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the celebrating solitude, how to develop and honor your highest self. That actually, I got inspired to write that book when I came back from a long trip to India, and I was, I think it was 37, yeah, and I came back, and I realized while I was there, I was a single lady in India,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that the community, the people were treating me very differently than maybe other people. That somehow it was as though I was already dead. I was an old
Mm-hmm.
woman because I was single. There was no hope for me, and again, that was cultural, but at the same time, it made me think being single at 37, um, I have to somehow be okay with the fact that I may be alone the rest of my life. And what am I going to do to make that okay?
Okay.
And so I was living in New York City at the time and living by myself. I had no roommates or anything. And I thought, well, let me dive into learning that self love, learning how to love this Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the book came out of that. And the reason solitude is so important is because we are shutting out the chatter and the influence of everyone else around us,
Yeah.
at least for a few minutes a day. So the book talks about
Yeah.
how to develop a solitude practice. So it's a commitment that you make once a week, or I'm sorry, once a day, that could be 5 minutes, it could be a couple hours, depending on what you have. Could
Yep.
be 2 minutes, could be your time in the shower, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is. But that you are committing to doing something that you love. Could be journaling, could be taking a walk alone, it could be reading, knitting, whatever it is that celebrates who you are at least once a day.
Hmm.
And then talk about the neural pathways. That's burning into your neural pathways the understanding that I am important, that
Mm-hmm. Yes, it
my
is.
my needs are important.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not selfish to take time for yourself. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's important to stress. If you don't take time for yourself, then anything you give to anyone else is inauthentic,
Yeah.
because it's like having a party and filling everyone's drink glass with an empty pitcher. You have to
Mm-hmm.
fill your own pitcher first. You have to
Right.
recharge your own battery,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
you're actually doing, when you take time for yourself or do things for yourself, for the people pleasers out there, you're actually helping others,
Yes.
because you have more energy to give to them. Because one
Yes.
thing we know about love is that it doesn't run out. It just
Mm-hmm.
keeps growing. So
Yes.
if you are doing for yourself and showing yourself that love, you're not going to run out of love. You're going to create more love, and that
Mm-hmm.
spills out, and then you have a lot more energy to give to others. So that's
Right.
why taking time for ourselves is so important. So that's what that book is about. And it walks you through how to create a solitude practice and why it's important, and all of that.
Yeah.
So that's, you want
My
to tell us?
self-care course is called Selfish is the New Selfless because it's based on what that connection you made. Like when we start to fill this pitcher up, then we can fill the drinks at the party, right? Like taking care of ourselves actually is the first step in taking care of all the people in our life. And I think there's just been this conditioned idea of what selflessness means.
Right.
And so it was a play on words with that. Like I want people to take care of themselves so that they can do that kind of service instead of depleting themselves in pursuit of that kind of service. Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I write in my book, it's not selfish, it's self-ish.
There you go. I love it. Yep. Yep. Ish.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
And it's important, we can't, if you've ever tried to talk on your on your mobile phone with no battery, it's really hard to communicate.
Yeah.
So you have to charge your battery so that you can communicate in an authentic way with other people.
Completely. All
Mm.
right. So what little bit of advice do you have for my listeners here if they're on the front end of this, they're still feeling more in the stuck place, and not in the I'm open and ready to kind of see where midlife will take me and where my transformation is going to take me? What's your advice for that woman?
The woman who is stuck.
Stuck. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I found for me, it's the very first thing again is non-judgment. Start to just
Okay.
practice a little non-judgment in your life. What is yourself telling you about yourself? And really try again to speak to yourself as though you would speak to a best friend,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Just practice that. Just take notice of where you're judging. And then
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself, where is that judging coming from? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
54 years old and I don't have a bikini body. Who told me that was important to have?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Mm-hmm. Somebody
I've given
selling
birth.
bikinis. That's the answer to
Right.
that
Yeah,
question.
exactly. And yes, and the entire advertising industry,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And to some extent the patriarchy, but we won't go into that story right now,
No,
but
no need.
right. And so just do a little gentle self inquiry. Start with that. Just notice without judgment, where am I being hard on myself, and how might I begin to reframe how
Mm-hmm.
I speak to myself in a more loving way, and just see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I always frame it as stay curious instead of staying
Yeah.
judgy.
Mhm.
If we're just kind of taking the curiosity of, that's interesting. Look at me doing that thing again that is not serving
Oh,
me.
yeah.
Instead of, there you go again with this blip, 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 and then all that
Right.
self-critical thinking and self-doubt. And that's toxic. It's not going to help you. So I like that. Just non-judgmental and treating yourself like your best friend.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I'm
I
teaching a
like it.
course right now called "Be Your Own Best Friend," and so, and that's what we're working on. Is like,
Mm-hmm.
really, geez, there's this self that I could actually. We do a lot of self hugging.
Yes.
Everybody can
Yes.
do that. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it really does feel good to hug
It
yourself.
does. It
Um,
does.
but I mean, that's a little tongue in cheek, but it does actually, talk about working with your body. It feels good. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, being your own best friend is so important, and it sounds really daunting until you start practicing just those tiny little adjustments.
Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about where my listeners can find you. I know that you're opening up your one-on-one coaching. You also have courses, as you've alluded to. So tell us where we can find you, Rachel.
Yes, the easiest place to find me is at my website. So you can
Mm-hmm.
go to rachelastaretherapy.com. If that's too much to remember, you can go to myselfpath, myselfpath.com, and take you to the same place. Get
Great.
on the email list, and then you'll know about all of my upcoming offerings. I do see clients one-on-one. And what's different from some traditional therapy is I don't expect people to lock into weekly sessions.
Mm.
I'll take people just once. It's like, I have this one thing I want to work on, and let's see what we can do in 50 minutes. That's fine.
That's
You
fine.
can
Yeah.
just go on and we can do it that way, or
Yeah.
through coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, no, great. And we will always have links to both in the notes for this podcast. So they can click on that too if they're someplace where they can see the link and they can go straight to your website. But that's great. Thank you so very much for being on the podcast. It's been a real delight having you here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really quite an honor
Oh,
to get to talk about this amazing and important stuff. So
it
thank you for
is.
having the podcast.
It is. It's always just a little coffee and conversation for me.
Nice.
Great. Thank you. Beautiful. That's all I have to say. That was a beautiful conversation. I was really appreciative of Rachel Astarte coming on and really helping illuminate for us self-development work. What does that mean to do your own inner work? And why do we start there? I really loved how we started out the podcast speaking through this idea of, you need to start with the self. And then once the self is worked on, it's a fertile ground. It's a garden that you continue to work through and tend to. But then it allows you to go out into the world and do all the things that you want to do. Hun, that's a centered life thriving, really. When you think about it, all of the work that I talk to you about is about putting you in a place where you're living the centered life. It's not a place you arrive. It's a garden that you tend to. And the work that we are needing to do for ourselves, that self-development work, that self-exploration and realization, it's essential. It's essential to us being authentic in this world and bringing the best of ourselves to this world. And it certainly helps us love our lives better and find that centered life thriving.
Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I have to make sure at the end of each of these episodes that I give you the disclaimer that none of the material that I talk about in these podcasts is meant to replace any kind of therapy or formal medical or mental health treatment. And in fact, anything that I offer on my website, my coaching programs, any kind of psychoeducational materials that I release are not a replacement for that level of care. So just take that into account when you listen. This is information for you, and hopefully you find it of value, both as an educational tool and for your entertainment. And I also want to mention that if anyone you know is in a mental health crisis, needs additional help, I always include these two crisis resources. They're available to anybody. Pick up the phone and dial 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And you can always visit their website at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Additionally, there's actually a crisis text line. So if you're not somebody that likes to pick up the phone, text HOME, home, to 741-741 to the crisis text line. And you can find them online at crisistextline.org. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And I hope that you like and follow me wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe consider leaving me a review. It always helps me to keep this podcast relevant when I know what you want to hear about.